Let's see, to start off with, so most uncertainty, when we think about it, we perceive external uncertainties, things that are going on in the economy, in the marketplace with our customers and whatever, and they're a huge part of what we have to consider. Um, so they can be whether customers are going to order, how customers are doing themselves. It can be new customers or new orders. Um, so that brings a huge amount of uncertainty. The availability of staff, the uncertainty in the supply chain, all of those are uncertainties that come to mind. Um, but there's also a huge amount of uncertainty within organizations, stuff that we don't know. It may be information that is known somewhere in the organization or could be known. So all of those, so there's a whole lot of uncertainties. Some of them are external and some of them are internal. And they lead, if they're not managed or controlled or understood in a collective way, they can cause an awful lot of confusion and stop us being optimal in how we execute our business.
Yeah, it's kind of like I was thinking this morning, it's kind of, I would guess that when people saw what the theme of this webinar was going to be, they're thinking more in terms of the kind of the tariff situation at the moment that America's flinging into the global economy, but the kind of lose sight of the stuff that's happening internally, the internal processes that aren't there. And that's kind of part of the uncertainty as well. So,
Well, you brought politicians into it there a bit with what's been going on recently.
one in particular.
One in particular, but it brings me back to a politician from the same stable years ago who used to talk about known unknowns and unknown unknowns, Donald Rumsfeld. I think this is a situation where there are those uncontrollables, like what's going on with global tariffs, and we just have to see how all that plays out. And it's going to affect different people in different ways, obviously. Um, but there's an awful lot that we can help ourselves with within our organizations. There's information that's known in different pockets of an organization, or there's information that should be known, data that should be completed in forms or provided by people that isn't provided as diligently or as timely or as precisely as possible. And it's all of those unknowns that we really can put manners on if we really think about it and put good processes in place to collect the data and manage the data that's already available to us, make information and routines out of that data. And it's those unknowns that will really, S&OP helps to take an awful lot of the uncertainty that's, I call it self-inflicted in organizations, if we really think about it correctly. And then that will put us in better stead for handling the the disruptions that keep coming at us from all the external influencers from day to day.
So, like from my experience, or what I've seen in the past, is the kind of S&OP puts into place the kind of routines or processes so that you can react effectively to changes in kind of demands or your customer needs. Um, it's just so as I know we did a previous webinar and we kind of went through some of the steps on the S&OP process. But would you mind just going through the basic kind of steps, the basic monthly kind of routine of S&OP? And I'll just put up a slide here that might help people, okay? I'll just try to share this here.
Thanks,
And
Maurice.
if you wouldn't mind going through.
Well, just while you're sharing that, first
Yeah.
of all, the S&OP is a very comprehensive set of routines that goes all the way from the day-to-day management of production or the service that a company provides, or indeed, a company may provide both, all the way to the much longer range, the product development cycles and the roadmap for products that are 2 or 3 years out, or even market entry into different markets and different jurisdictions. So we have a very long range horizon and cycle at one end that the business looks at infrequently. And then we have the regular things that we look at day to day, if you like. But there's one cycle in particular that we gravitate towards, that everything hooks onto, and that's really the monthly cycle. Now, Morris has kindly shared just a simple graphic of 3 or 4 key meetings that happen in the monthly cycle. And this really sets the pace and the tone and the veracity of the whole sales and operations planning process. So the first one where the little red diamond is the demand review. That's to have a very clear understanding. Do we have enough orders coming into the business for the next, let's say, 14 to 16 weeks to make sure that we are setting ourselves up for success? Now, I say 14 to 16 weeks because if something is changing in the demand coming from our customers, we will need that length of time to react to it. If we needed more production capacity or more operators or more service engineers, then it would take us that length of time to get them sourced, hired, and trained and deployed in the business. Likewise, if we have an uptick or a change in demand, then we need to be able to get hold of the parts through our supply chain. And the lead times for most things would fit within that kind of 12 to 14-week horizon. There may be very long lead time items where the finance people combined with supply chain need to make risk buys. But in general, we can cover most of the foreseeable demand in that 12 to 14 weeks.
Okay.
Go ahead, Martin or Mars.
No, but it was just, I suppose, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I suppose the next question I was going to ask is like, from what I've seen in different companies, sometimes kind of, the customer demand exists in various different pockets, various different spreadsheets or kind of sources of information. Like, kind of what's been your experience, and what's the best way of kind of pulling that information together? Like the SNOP process is essentially a system. I suppose it depends on the information going into it. Like, what would you recommend, or what have you seen in the past?
Well, well, I first of all I'll describe some of the difficulties, Morris, in what I see. One is that for current customers, there's often demand that is reasonably clear, and it's coming from an account management team or an internal part of the sales team. We call it account management for the purposes of this. And they usually have a very good handle. They're receiving the orders or the purchase orders from the customers, and you can consider those as contracts. They're pretty much 100% reliable. Those are purchase orders, and we're going to fulfill those, and we know the delivery dates for them. So that's real. I call it concrete demand for a minute, or 100% demand. Then there's another type of demand that's a very close in its probabilities, nearly 100%. It's where we have long-standing customers that have predictable demand. We can almost tell that they're going to use a certain amount of our products or services every month. And so you can pencil that in as quite predictable. So I'd call the first part of that the booked with the PO and then booked but without a PO. So we're reserving a certain amount of our capacity for them because they show up every month. And they generally come, as I say, from that internal accounts department. But separate from that, then an organization has a sales team with different salespeople, possibly in different regions or geographies, possibly different guises. Some of them are distributors, some of them are partners, some of them are pathfinders whose job is just to find new clients and open doors. And all of that demand is a lot less predictable. There's a probability associated with it. And think of it almost like we're really thinking of forecast now. There's I would use the analogy, it's not unlike if there's a storm out in the southern Atlantic. The weather forecasters are telling us it's coming our way. We might have some unpredictable, changeable weather, or we might have the full brunt of that storm. We won't know for a number of days. So there's a probability it will hit us. And we have to treat that other demand, that third demand, in that way. We have to understand how likely it is to happen and when it's likely to happen and what we're going to have to do as a result of it. And I think it's very important that an organization gets those three types of demand into one place and is able to visualize them or display them in graphic form or whatever, so that everybody understands what's coming at the business and how well set up it is for success.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, essentially, I suppose then if you look at the first step being the demand review, then the purpose of the kind of demand review is to consolidate all the different information from the different sources into one clear picture of what the actual customers want.
Yes, yes. And the first part of this is, as I said, the consolidation of the two or three different types, however you look at it, but also putting rules and regulations around that very unpredictable, that funnel of demand that's coming from the business development people or the sales world, because the nature of their world is very unpredictable. They don't know exactly when a decision is going to be made within a client organization, um, or quickly we're going to have to turn it around. So you have a funnel of demand coming from the
Yeah.
very unpredictable further out, um, in towards, when the deal is likely to drop, and they're talking about exact designs or exact dates, and where it's to be delivered to. It becomes more predictable, and we should have a language so that we can be more precise internally about what stage each piece of the demand is at.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm just gonna skip forward to the next one. So just this might help people visualize what you're talking about.
Thank you, Morris. Yeah, that does exactly. So where where we're at the top of that funnel in green, we have a lower predictability. The lead, it's just as it says, a lead. It's further out. It's an idea. The salespeople are all excited about it. They're trying to get us to jump up and down within operations or whatever. But we don't know when it's going to happen or how mature they are in their own decision making. Or sometimes it might be they're arriving straight with demand that they want fulfilled within the next month, and it goes straight to the bottom of the funnel. But it would be important for the organization to have some kind of a language and a discipline around how it thinks about the different leads or deals or opportunities, and what state of progress they're at, and when we can expect them to drop in the operations. Because the sales and the operations people will need time to react to large pieces of demand coming at them.
Okay. So like just to clarify for people, there's an abbreviation in there, CRM. That's just an abbreviation for customer relationship management. Various different companies use different ones like Salesforce or HubSpot. We've kind of used ourselves. We're not trying to sell any. We're just kind of trying to give examples of stuff that um, we've seen people use in the past. I suppose the thing is, it's kind of like that. There's a structure around it and there's a process around it. So I'm just going to skip back to the previous slide. So we were talking about the demand review. And essentially, I suppose just one point I wanted to make is like, you know, I mean, the starting point for this S&OP process is that you have an accurate picture of what the business plan is to meet the business strategy. Because essentially, what you're going to be doing in this process is comparing what you can do to what you should be doing. So, if you don't mind, then we've kind of discussed the demand review. Can we just get back to the supply review, please?
Sure. So the demand review collects all that demand and checks that there's sufficient demand against the business plan. And it's very important that in the first step, that the people responsible for business development understand if there's a gap, particularly in the coming 3 or 4 months. And is there anything that they need to do about that gap to close the gap versus the business plan? Now we move on to the supply review, and the supply review will take the outcome of the demand review. What are the orders that we must fulfill in the coming 14 or 16 weeks? And now we need to check, do we have the operational capacity and the supply chain capacity to meet all of that demand? So in some cases, that will be using the IT systems, an ERP, or in some cases, an elaborate spreadsheet to make sure that we're buying all of the materials and parts and bits we need to fulfill the demand, and that we don't have any surprises when we go to execute. So the supply review is the culmination of those checks to make sure that we will be able to meet all the demand that the business development people have told us is coming at us in the foreseeable future.
Okay. Um, so at this stage, then you understand the demand, you know how that compares to what the business plan is, and you've kind of organized your response. So my understanding from after the supply review, you should be you should have identified whatever issues that are going to stop you from meeting the demand, essentially. So I know in some cases people skip directly over to the executive S&O peer review. In smaller organizations, you may not need the pre-S&O peer review, but that's essentially, there will be people like in operations, supply chain, who will be able to address some of the issues that have been highlighted without going to the senior management team. So, I mean, essentially the executive S&O peer review is where you kind of um, you highlight or issues to the senior management team where you need support to meet the customer demand. That's the correct interpretation, yeah?
I think so, Morris. Yeah, and just to elaborate, then the pre S&OP review for large organisations that makes an awful lot of sense where there's a lot of coordination required. Um, for smaller organisations, I think the step still needs to be considered, but it may not be a formal review. Think of it more as the responsibility of the supply chain manager or director, or the operations manager or director, whichever you have in position, to coordinate the different responses coming from supply and operations and the input from demand, and make sure that they have investigated any opportunities to close the gap, and they're making recommendations to the executive S&OP what um, what additional resources or what additional risks are happening, or what they would recommend would be the plan that should be adopted. So, as much as possible, that step should probably happen, but it may not be a very formal step. It's just a checking and reviewing
Okay.
internally rather than the formal step.
Thank you. I just want to kind of go back to one of our original points where we were talking about, there's the big external issues like tariffs, and then there's the kind of internal uncertainty. So, from your experience, what kind of routines need to support? This is kind of like the monthly S&OP planning cycle. So that's, the week one of the month you do demand reviews, next week the supply review, and you follow through. But there's a lot of other kind of processes that need to be in place to support those. What do you think they might be?
Well, there are a couple of very key ones, Morris. First of all, um, an S&OP process like you're showing us on the screen here has put together the plan for the next 12 or 14 weeks. The very next step is that that plan needs to be taken and scheduled within the operations and within the supply chain. It's very important that that scheduling is very precise and is very accurate, and takes the plan and schedules it so that it's very clear what has to be done when, and most importantly, that we'll know whether we're ahead or behind on that plan. And we'd use what we'd call pit meetings, but those daily tiered meetings that check, are we ahead or behind in a production area, in a service offering, in whatever we're doing. Each of the units of operations and indeed supply chain need to know whether they are on plan or whether they're obstacles to people meeting the plan. So it's very important, first of all, that the plan finds its way in a very detailed fashion down into the operation. It just doesn't stay as a notional plan. And those daily meetings check whether we're on plan or not. Now, the information about whether we're on plan should find its way to the executive leadership so that they can remove any roadblocks or help with additional resources if the plan isn't being met.
So, like a big part of the kind of process that they need to be in place is the feedback loop to see how things are doing. And presume, I know I've read about it myself, but I mean, I know like even you would put measures in place on the S&OP process itself so that you're actually measuring how successful it is. So you're in a situation of continuous improvement as well.
Absolutely, Morris. But it sounds very simple and very straightforward.
Mm.
But say a materials allocator within a production environment at the top of a production line may make local decisions on what's going to be made on that production line next, based on what material they have available or what's already running on a piece of equipment or a line. And that may knock off the schedule that was planned and expected, that was organized by first in, first out, or by customer delivery dates.
Mm.
And if they're not in total sync with everything else, there's little disruptions going on that are messing up the whole system, that we really need to be aware that exactly what's planned is what's being executed and what rules of execution are in place.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that because I was in an organization lately, which shall remain nameless, but the the decisions on what was to be done today, for example, were being made by the line leads, the material allocators, without any reference to what the plan was. So it's kind of like, oh, we have the material to do that, let's do that. Whereas like what they were working on might be needed for weeks. So it's kind of like I think the SNOP, the part of that process is connecting the people who are actually doing the work to what the plan is.
Yes, and that's a very important point, Morris, that they have to. We don't want to disempower them. We want those
No.
line leads that you're describing to be able to make decisions, but they have to understand the rules of the game. They can't
Yeah.
be making them in a little vacuum without all of the information. So now it's not practical to expect them to know the whole strategic plan or whatever, but there has to be a set of rules and expectations that coordinate all of the activities, much like the conductor of an orchestra. You can't let different instruments be playing different tunes. Then you're playing jazz. You're not playing a symphony.
Yeah.
And an orchestration, an organization is really more like an orchestra.
Yeah, it's kind of it's like we always talk about in lean, we always talk about the right first time, but you need to be doing the right things as well.
Yes, yes.
I just wanted to come back and whatever I'm doing, looking at a process or doing a process mapping exercise with people in an organization, one of the first questions, if not the first question I ask is who owns the process? So like in organizations, who is the kind of owner for the SNOP process?
I nearly have to give you two answers to that question, Morris.
I thought you might.
In in a in a well organized operation where there is real psychological safety, and by that I mean that a person at a more junior level in the organization has the confidence and the courage to call people out that are senior to them if activities aren't happening, then I would look for somebody in that middle management echelon of an organization to run the S&OP process. I don't think senior leadership are that well equipped to do it because the nature of their work is that they're in and out, they're traveling, they're changing context on a regular basis. So they're not often the best in the world to keep routines going. Um, so I would prefer if it was somebody that is able to work in a lot of the detail, is used to working in the detail of the organization, and is able to work across multiple departments. Like a good project manager, gets on with people, but is able to hold them accountable and has the support of the leadership to hold them accountable. That would be the ideal person for me, and that would be my S&OP coordinator. If there's any doubt that they wouldn't be able to influence leaders of other departments or other areas of the organization, or wouldn't have the clout to make the routines happen the way they should, then you'd have to defer it to either the supply chain director or the ops director. But to me, that's kind of a missed opportunity. There's something wrong if you're not able to empower people at the middle echelons of the organization to have that courage to stand up and say, you will all attend this meeting, come hell or high water. It's too important to the organization, and I have the authority invested in me to make you do what's required. That should be the feel of it. Hope that
Yeah,
answers
so
your question.
yeah, so I mean, but I suppose the essential point for me, it's like the very simple graphic we have up there on the screen. It looks very simple, but actually in practice, it's probably very difficult, and it actually needs a degree of what would I use of basically standardization, so as that hell or high water, the demand review happens when it's supposed to, the supply review happens when it's supposed to, and if it doesn't happen, I mean, I presume that, like, for example, if the demand review doesn't happen, then you can't do the supply review. I mean, it looks very simple the way we're talking about the S&OP process, but I think it affects every part of the business, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time.
Yes, yes, yeah, and or the larger organizations, the really multinational, big multinationals, they they know how to do this because they have to. You can't
Mm.
coordinate organizations of that size without having this kind of precision and accountability. If your data is expected on a certain date, then it must happen on that date. Um, and unfortunately, smaller organizations with the cut and thrust of everything that's going on don't pay as much respect to those routines and the timeliness of different actions. Not in all cases, but in some cases. And that really undermines and creates the uncertainty that we're here today talking about. It creates huge internal uncertainty that's kind of unnecessary. If we all did the things that we should do when we should do them, then it makes for quite an easy process. But don't underestimate it. There's a lot in it. It's
Yeah,
complicated, but it's very straightforward. It's not rocket science.
yeah, and a kind of extension on that is that we talked about earlier, made reference to the quality of the information coming in to the process, and like so far in our discussion, we talked about kind of operations and supply chain or whatever, but there's a lot of support functions like engineering and new product introduction, and I suppose the way I interpret it is that the way they can support the process is having, for example, engineering bills of materials correct, quantities correct, that the data they're providing to people is correct,
Oh,
because essentially, like the decisions are being made on the basis of this information.
oh, absolutely, Morris. I'll just list off a couple of examples. Like the HR department recruiting operators, when we'll have the operators, what skills they'll have, when they'll have their basic training, when they'll have been through induction, and they'll be a fully fledged operator that's able to carry a load in production. That's one. Like if we don't know when they're going to arrive or when they're going to start, we don't know how much we're going to get out of our production lines. Then you can move on to the maintenance departments. Like if they're doing preventive maintenance or they have unpredictable equipment, then that plays into uncertainty in our plans and our data, all the way into an engineering team or a design team designing new products. What effect are they going to have on our production? What's the data like? Is that new product going to be easy to make? Have they designed it for manufacturability and to flow through our lines, or have they just designed it to all the features the customer asked for? So lots of people will have a huge influence on this and their data. Um, Supply chain are another example. If a supplier lets somebody down or the logistics breaks down when parts are on the way in, or we lose visibility to the flow of parts in, then we can't give predictability to our operations to do their part.
Yeah, I suppose if I just refer back to mine and your experience in the past in Dell. Dell was working to customer order, so all the processes behind it need to be correct. So like if somebody places an order today, they expected it in a day or two. So to get to that level of manufacture, you have all your processes, to use the cliche, ducks need to be in a row.
Uh, Absolutely, Morris, I'd agree. Unfortunately, a lot of people haven't got the clout that the likes of Dell Computers would have with their
Yeah.
suppliers. So sometimes you're at the whims of the supplier or groupage in transport or whatever. But the idea is still valid that you need to be able to coordinate it and put manners on it as much as possible and exercise that clout. You are the buyer after all of the parts. Um, and so much of that information is internal. We go back to that. So much of that unpredictability um, can be taken away. If I just use something as simple as the HR one, like, is it extremely clear exactly how many people we need when we need them? Is it extremely clear who's taking parental leaves, what kind of sick leave we can expect, what kind of holiday rosters are in place? There's lots of information. When are we recruiting the people? When are they coming in for training? When are they going to be available to the line? HR can provide huge information, or it may be a little uncertain. When are we getting those people every couple of days? That doesn't help. We can put consistent data around a lot of these things to make it more predictable.
Yeah, I'd just like to come back to the executive S&OP review for a minute. It's kind of like all the kind of information in terms of what you put together on demand, what you can supply, what the resources are. Essentially, what you're doing is consolidating the information to make the senior manager, so to enable the senior management to make the decisions on what's going to provide value for the company and meet what the overall business plan is.
Yeah, and maybe decisions is nearly too strong a word in this case, Morris, because they're really providing support. The decisions really are within the process. It's an either or. We have the resources and we can do this, or we need to go to plan B.
Mm.
So in a lot of cases, it's the recommendations from within the process that they're giving resources or support to. They're rarely making decisions, or they should be able to keep themselves out of the process a bit and just allow the rules of the process help with the decisions, and they just provide the resource and the support in the way of enabling extra overtime or extra shifts or new equipment or outsourcing particular things. They have that gift that the process mightn't have. So they're usually providing resources to decisions that are quite obvious to everybody that's working within the process.
Yeah, but I suppose, in terms of like, even you go back to the demand review, like if you have the business plan and then you have what your actual demand is, there's actions coming out of that that says, okay, either we have enough demand or we don't have enough demand. If we don't have enough demand, we need to get the sales guys selling harder. If you look at the supply review, maybe, okay, we have all the demand and now we can't meet it. So it's kind of like, do the supply chain people need to look at bringing up, second sources or third sources for parts? So at each step of the process, there's actions to be assigned and followed. And my understanding is kind of like, this needs to exist in a central location so that, if I'm just going to skip on to this slide, and essentially, that there's some kind of register of the actions that are coming out over each of the meetings, that there's names assigned and dates assigned so that, all the actions are followed up on. And essentially, that could fall under the S&OP coordinator role. But the thing is, like, for example, this is one, it's a kind of a planner board we use it's in Microsoft 365, but it kind of shows that I've been a naughty boy because some of my actions are in red there. So, but essentially the point is that, some kind of mechanism for managing the actions, recording them, so is that, just to get back to the S&OP coordinator role as well, that they're making sure like that each of these meetings has inputs and outputs, and that they're actually followed through, and if there are actions and people that have to do stuff, that's followed through. Just wanted to kind of clarify that on the S&OP coordinator role as well.
Well, Morris, this is absolutely crucial, and it doesn't just apply to S&OP. It applies to any part of an organization. I mean, we all go to meetings, we have discussions, we leave the discussions with slightly different views of things, and then we get very busy with everything else in our day jobs. And the follow-on meeting that starts with the checking the actions, well, a lot of organizations don't do that. Write down the actions, confirm them by communicating them through a board like this would be ideal, or at least that the minutes are communicated through email or some format like that, and that there is a check in some form or other to make sure they happen. Because again, if all of these actions aren't followed up on, the S&OP system won't work. It depends on us leaving each of the reviews with an expectation that our colleagues will follow up on what was agreed. For them to follow up on what was agreed, the minutes and the decisions that were agreed need to be very precise, and there needs to be a custodian of those, that S&OP coordinator that you mentioned.
Yeah, there was one other point I really wanted to address as part of this, and just over the years being in various different organizations, you can see the importance of the planning process. And sometimes what happens is, like, a customer doesn't like what they're getting in terms of delivery, so they call the managing director, ball him out. Next thing, the managing director comes out the line and says, no, change that, we're going to do this instead. So it's kind of like, that's a level of uncertainty as well. So it's kind of part of this, I think, needs to also address that kind of thing where you're kind of addressing the kind of issues and planning. That's been my experience. I don't know if you've seen that in yours.
Ah, no, God, Morris, you're not making it easy with these questions. Like there's ambiguity in all of them. Look,
Yeah.
um, we'd all
Wouldn't be worth it
prefer,
if it was easy.
yeah, we'd all prefer a very predictable process.
Yeah.
Um, the more predictable we can make it for everybody, the easier it is for everybody to be successful. But sometimes within a process, we can't see everything. And there may be the customer who, has an emergency breakdown. They haven't been a customer today, but the business development people have been tracking them for a year or two, hoping to try and get them on board. And now is our break. If we could do a quick turnaround and do something special, there might be a great prize. Well, then it makes sense. The CEO or the business development director can see more than everybody else. And it makes sense to cut across the process and do something extraordinary. Now, different organizations cope with that,
Yeah.
have different mechanisms for coping with it. Some might have a special speed process that caters for the odd drop in, that sets aside an amount of capacity and expects that to happen occasionally. Other organizations might, and I've come across this quite a bit in the food industry, where it's a sunny day and suddenly they get very different orders, maybe for barbecue type products rather than stewing type products from the cold weather. And they have to change their whole production around, and it's quite complicated. So they might decide, well, we'll have a schedule in the morning until noon and it's frozen and nothing can change in it. But at midday, we'll have another quick meeting and we'll allow the schedule to be adjusted for the afternoon. And then the afternoon shift have some chance of having predictability as well with a fresh schedule that they know what has to happen from then on. So there are various ways of coping with it. But I suppose the less frequent it is, the easier it is for everybody to be successful. And if that CEO or whoever you're talking about, Morris, is doing that 3 and 4 times a day, then there'll be no certainty and no predictability, and there'll be no way of measuring whether we had a good day or a bad day because the targets will be shifting as well.
Yeah.
That doesn't make for a great experience organizationally or for a great S&OP process. So I try to minimize it, but remember that business isn't a straightforward process. It's almost like the other team will have tactics as well. So you have to be able to adjust to what's coming at you to a degree, but
Yeah, it kind
minimize
of
it.
it kind of depends on the nature of the business as well. I've seen, I've experienced in places where they might set up a separate line for specials where they got their high runners and they'll run them through you know, high velocity lines and they don't change essentially if they have like, you know, in Dell like you were building laptops. But in other businesses, then it doesn't work like that, and you always have to give yourself a bit of wriggle room for the specialists, or as you say, the kind of developing new customers.
Yes, yes.
I'm just kind of conscious of the time now, so it's just gone on 12 minutes past 1. Dan, was there any questions that came in while we were talking?
I haven't had any so far, no. But if
Okay.
anybody has one, they can just raise their hand.
Yeah, and I suppose like to a certain extent, you mightn't be able to. People mightn't feel comfortable raising particular issues as to their company or whichever. But what we were proposing to do was, we can organize a follow-up call with people if they want to, and say offer 30 minutes of a call to somebody if they want. I'll put up the contact details at the end, and feel free to contact us. And if you have specific issues you want to raise, we'll talk to you about that. Okay, so I mean, I've really, I suppose the other thing is kind of like we discussed it as well, is at the early demand review, if you don't have enough demand, then you have to kind of push the sales guys into making it. And we've talked about the kind of the kind of funnel to manage that. I suppose, Dean, was there anything else that you wanted to add before I
There's
sum up?
just before we sum up, I think
Yeah,
there's a question there. Is it from
There is. We've a hand up there. There's no name on the account,
I
but
can't see it.
M&E Precision?
yeah.
Hi, sorry, yeah. I tried to put a question into the chat, but it seems to be blocked. I don't know if it's just me.
Oh, apologies. That could be a technical problem on our side. Don't assume it's you. Yes.
Go ahead, anyway.
No,
Do you
it's
want to
across
ask
the
the
board.
question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, the S&OP coordinator, would you say that's a role in itself, or would it be part of a larger role?
Oh, very much depends on your organization. It's probably part of a larger role that's around the account management or the account management coordination. Um, but in larger organizations, depending on the number of orders that are coming in, the speed, it could be a full-time role. It's it's a lot of coordination. But out of context, I can't genuinely say yes or no. But certainly, Morris mentioned earlier that both he and I had worked with Dell computers. There were multiple people in that role in Dell, for instance, doing that coordination. In smaller organizations, definitely, like below 50 people, if there's not a huge number of transactions coming through, then it's likely to be a fraction of a role.
Okay. Thank you. And then just on the plan, you're talking about a 14 to 16 week plan based on known orders. How would you handle drop-in orders? Would you recommend leaving a certain amount of capacity for those orders? Like, how would you typically see people handling those?
Well, there's two aspects to that. First of all, from an operational capacity, setting aside an amount of your capacity for drop-in orders is very manageable, but it may cause consternation from a procurement point of view, depending on how your material, if it's very generic material, then it doesn't. But if it's very specific to particular orders, then you would have a problem there. So you could set aside capacity, but you'd have to take those orders contingent on the supply chain being able to fulfill the needs in the time scale. But it's a very common problem. It just needs I need a little more context to answer it thoroughly as to whether you would have the material available.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have another question there from Shane and Marco. And go ahead,
Hello,
Shane.
Shane.
Hello, guys. How are you?
Good, thank you.
I have lots of questions as usual, but this very interesting discussion and kind of aligns a lot with what we do from a day to day. But I suppose one of the things we struggle with is I have two questions. So one is regarding that balance of trying to manage the short term or the firefighting of urgencies versus trying to, if you like, plan a more if you scheduled life on a planning horizon, and putting the right resource into one or the other, and any advice around trying to balance that one?
In its nature, it would almost have to be very general advice, Shane. The more forethought or the more thinking you have done about the future, the less short-term firefighting you will have to do. So I would always recommend doing more thinking about the longer range. And this doesn't have to be an extraordinary effort of the organization. Just stopping and setting aside a piece of time to think about what do we have coming at us for the next 4 months? What things could we do right now that would make it a lot easier to achieve that? It's just having the space and the time to have those kind of conversations. And I'm reminded of a kind of a phrase, I think it's attributed to General Eisenhower, where it's not the plan that matters, it's the planning, it's the thinking about what's coming at you and what you need to do to help it that's important. And I think if nothing else, as long as that is happening, you'll get a good balance, and it'll probably move you towards the right of that, more towards the planning and less towards the frenetic short-term firefighting, as I would describe it.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you. And then really more is it's again probably around the organizational piece. And one, I suppose, I see challenges at times is the alignment of, if you like, the organization or the team around the intent and responsibilities versus priorities and metrics. You know, and you know, one that kind of you know, a simple one would be perhaps, you know, demand matching versus stock holding, you know, and sort of trying to get that right. Um, you know, and again, that's not an easy question, I understand, but what are your thoughts around it?
Well, so again, Shane, it comes back to this. If the business is driven very hard on KPIs, then people will be forced to think of their local KPI and what their department or their silo needs to achieve. Whereas if there's a very good interconnected understanding among the leadership of the business, coupled with very good management systems, of which S&OP is a key one, and I'd say policies around stockholding, you know, how much money or resources can we afford for raw material, finished goods? What's our business model? What do we agree is normal? And then what are our expectations of our operations in terms of their turnaround? And what's our expectations in terms of the supply chain to deliver into it? So we have to make sure that all of those join together to form a coherent policy. Because if we are only buying parts, raw material parts, when orders come in, and orders are coming in a short lead time, and we don't have any finished goods stock, well, then we're going to disappoint a customer. So all of those policies, we really almost need to write down what is the policy for each of those and make sure that they all connect together, that they're not at variance with each other. And that's really a set of rules or policies that would underpin the S&OP process. But to underpin that, you would need a leadership team that are understanding each other's functions very well and understand that business system that underpins the S&OP processes. Hope that answers your question. Now it's a bit kind of highfalutin.
No, it's good food for thought. I'd say, yeah, it's certainly, and I think it is, yeah, it's that team alignment, I think, is key. Yeah.
Yeah. But like each of the operational people would need a very good financial appreciation. The finance people would need a very good operational appreciation. Everybody would need to understand what are the current obstacles that are getting in our way, whether it's a new product that's hard to digest into the organization or what it is, or a change in market circumstances that's driving holding policies up or down, or indeed the tariffs we started this off with that would be driving people to hold different inventories temporarily to see what way the wind is blowing. So it's hard to know, but really it needs to be written down, and most importantly, everybody needs to agree what those policies and understandings are of how we're running the business right now.
Yeah.
And kind of one approach, I think, on the whole S&OP thing is you're not going to do the whole lot of it overnight. So you might take it in phases where, you know, you look at getting the demand straight first and sorting out all the information you need there. And then once you have that, then go on to the supply, you know. So it's probably situational, you know. But you know, you have to kind of pace yourself almost as well. You won't get it all in 1 week, you know.
So, Morris, if we've no further questions, you might pop up that screen, just contact details. Everybody will have it from connecting in with us for the webinar. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Hope you didn't all forsake your lunch to join us, but thank you very much for your time, and thank you for the questions, and thank you, Morris and Dan, for organising it.
You're welcome. It's just one thing, I suppose, one point I'd make just before we leave is that when it was first started to asked to kind of get involved in doing this, I kind of had a different perception almost. And over the last few days or the last week, I've kind of become more focused on the internal uncertainty you need to take out rather than all the big events that happen outside, you know. I think you probably need to look inside and get all your processes straight, and then you'll get a long way towards having all that uncertainty out of the way, you know.
Yeah, well said. Yep, 100% agree.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much for
Very
your
good.
time, lads. I hope you can have your lunch now.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Cheers.
Take
Thanks,
care.
guys.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. End the event. Yeah. Send it.